you, Mr. President. I want to spend a few minutes discussing the ordinance we passed in 2018 and recounting the history of this legislation tonight. I suspect you'll hear a lot tonight about the 2018 ordinance. I know there is a lot of frustration among council members, but let's be clear. The ordinance is not what most of you are complaining about, and the changes being proposed tonight aren't going to fix those issues. If you'd like to see more camp clearings, there is no reason that can't be done under the existing ordinance. It sets no limits. If you didn't like it when LMPD disbanded its two-person homeless team, don't blame the ordinance. It had nothing to do with that. If you think we're seeing more homeless people on our streets and are frustrated by that, don't blame the ordinance, which didn't put them there and isn't keeping them there. If you think the administration hasn't handled these issues well, don't blame the ordinance. If you don't like that LMPD requires a trespass waiver to remove items from private property, don't blame the ordinance. It has nothing to do with that. The ordinance is simple. It says you shouldn't clear a camp and discard people's belongings without notice and an opportunity to work with people to get them into better situations before their belongings are destroyed. Clearings in inappropriate areas can and do happen, many of them. I first learned changes were being discussed on a Friday filing deadline in September. It was filed by title only. No one knew what was in the ordinance for 4 days. People who have been working on the streets with our houseless neighbors on these issues for years refreshed their browsers through Tuesday to find out what was being proposed. And it was almost unimaginably bad. Not mentioning homeless and dressed up as furthering managing public space and environmental justice, it was a dramatic and unworkable crackdown on anyone placing or storing anything on any public property or way with no requirement that it impeded anyone's access or created any harm or threat to anyone in any way, and providing for immediate confiscation of those items. New fines were also imposed for violating those new provisions. The proposal was so extreme that it drew the immediate attention and opposition of national and local organizations, the National Homeless Law Center and the ACLU, both of which concluded the proposal ran afoul of existing law in multiple ways. I know that the sponsors have the best intentions, and I say that especially to Nicole George, who has led this effort and with whom I've had very spirited discussions. From my side, maybe too spirited. Eventually, the sponsors agreed to modify the proposal, entirely deleting the storage section, modifying the new sidewalk access provision, and agreeing that items wouldn't be confiscated from sidewalks unless they impeded someone's access. Even later, they agreed to modify the section to include language which triggers the ordinance only when access is substantially impeded, language from an Indianapolis ordinance which has long protected houseless neighbors in that city. Another suggestion from the ordinance, however, defining what a substantial impediment was ignored. The proposal before us also continues to say that only property attributable to a specific individual needs to be stored if it is confiscated, which means that most things owned by our houseless neighbors won't be stored unless we can somehow get them to put their names on all their belongings. That's, of course, completely impractical, and none of us do that. The community was told that we needed a new law prohibiting blocking a public sidewalk because there was no state law prohibiting that. But LMPD testified that on further examination, that just wasn't true, and that an existing state law already covered the issue and allowed for clearing sidewalks when they were blocked. The ordinance was opposed by some of our very best partners, social service providers throughout the community who have stated it will make it more difficult to help houseless neighbors and ultimately get them off the street. We all received a letter from a broad coalition going way beyond those focused on homeless services, from the Association of Community Ministries, Goodwill Industries of Kentucky, Home of the Innocents, the House of Ruth, Metro United Way, St. John's Center, St. Vincent Paul, the Center for Women and Families, Up for Women and Children, Volunteers of America, Wellspring, and the Coalition for the Homeless, and 20 others. All of those organizations understand, like all of us, and agree that sidewalks cannot be blocked, but they believe there are other ways to see that they aren't. Several of those organizations have suggested a joint large meeting where all concerns, suggestions, and ideas can be freely aired, and that meeting simply has not occurred. In a late move, the proposal extends the prohibition on being in a motor vehicle in a park, any motor vehicle, to any time of day. It's already illegal in the nighttime hours. But the new prohibition in the daytime only extends to individuals using the park for, in quotes, temporary living accommodation purposes. In other words, people who have no home and live in a car. And we have a lot of those people in this community. That's drawn the attention of the Lexington Fair Housing Council, which litigates fair housing cases in Kentucky, and has written us all just this week to state that laws that create different penalties and rules for individuals because they are homeless have a clear, disparate impact on many of the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act, and therefore also violate the law. Just last week, another lawyer, my friend Councilman Mulvihill, one of 3 sponsors of this ordinance, moved to delete 2 sections of the ordinance on grounds that they are confusing and are a usurpation of state power. That amendment was objected to by the other 2 sponsors and ultimately rejected. Today, the 12 organizations I mentioned above and the 20 others wrote us again, begging us to table this ordinance until the Greenberg administration has a coordinated plan with service providers, the Metro Council, and the greater community. In 8 years here, I don't recall us dismissing such a plea from so many knowledgeable people that we respect. But here we are. The ordinance is certainly an improvement from the draconian version which was introduced in September, and I thank the sponsors for that, and particularly Councilwoman George. Fines, including the entirely new section Councilman Mulvihill tried to delete, have been lessened. I thank the sponsors for those changes, but I especially thank the hundreds of Louisvillians who spoke up for their houseless neighbors and for what's productive and what's counterproductive. I don't know how this ordinance will be enforced by the Greenberg administration, assuming it passes tonight. I'm grateful that the community and lawyers who protect the rights of our most vulnerable citizens will be watching closely. And I hope Metro Council will be watching too. After all, we were the body that said, nearly unanimously, 19-2 in 2018, and more recently when a camp was cleared on Market Street in one of the coldest, maybe the coldest night of the year, destroying the possessions of houseless neighbors with no notice was unacceptable. We've talked tonight a lot about our memories of being in council. I'm going to tell you one of my memories, and one of the biggest ones that I'll live with forever. In 2020, at the point in time count, at 4 a.m. on Frankfort Avenue, I went to a tent, and we were encouraged, of course, to try to get the people in the tent to talk to us and fill out forms. There was a gentleman in the tent who didn't want to speak, and I was encouraged to go talk to him. He looked at me through his tent and said, "I know you. You were there when I was last cleared from a camp." And he was right. I was. I had gone to that camp clearing. I've gone to lots of camp clearings. And then I started talking to him about all the camps he'd been cleared from. And there were multiple camps. Moving people from place to place isn't a plan, and it's cruel. As HUD Secretary Marcia Fuss said recently in Houston, no community has ever solved homelessness by banning it, sweeping and moving encampments from one area to another. To solve homelessness, we must offer people the housing, support, and services they so desperately need.
Thank you.